Linebacker Drew Sanders was carted off the field at Denver Broncos Training Camp on Saturday. We'll have that and much more coming up on today's bonus episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Injuries are the most unfortunate reality when it comes to any NFL training camp out there, and unfortunately, the Denver Broncos are not exempt. Drew Sanders, the third-year linebacker out of Arkansas, was carted off the field with a leg injury. At this point in time, he's going to have an MRI, so we don't know exactly the nature of the injury, but Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton did offer after practice that it is not the Achilles injury being resurfaced, I suppose, after what happened last year where Sanders missed a bunch of time after an offseason injury. Broncos Country, hate to have to bring you these kind of updates, but we'll tell you about what happened with Drew Sanders, maybe some of the fallout of that, as well as everything else that went down at Saturday's Denver Broncos training camp practice. Welcome into the show. My name is Sayre Bedinger. I'm the co-host here of Locked On Broncos, as well as the site expert at predominantlyorange.com. We appreciate every single one of you for tuning in every single day, making us your first listen of the day, or tuning in on the weekends for some bonus content. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Let's talk about Drew Sanders. Obviously, injuries have been an unfortunate reality for him to face. Basically, since coming into the league, it feels like he's really struggled to get on the field, to stay on the field, or to really play any role beyond just special teams. And part of that is the Broncos doing, right? I mean, obviously they played him at inside linebacker his rookie year, switched him to the edge his second year where he puts on a bunch of weight, suffers an offseason injury, comes back late in the season, then they change him back to the inside linebacker position this offseason. And it was just a couple of days ago we were talking about how Drew was reported as looking really explosive out there, running downhill, attacking the line of scrimmage, even without pads on, finding a way to stand out, which is really what he needs to do this offseason. And you know what? When a guy gets carted off the field, that's pretty much worst case scenario in everybody's mind, especially when the cart comes out and it's followed by an MRI. But of course, that's kind of standard procedure across the NFL. And hey, if you want to be optimistic for a moment here, just a few days ago, New York Jets quarterback Justin Fields was carted off the field and kind of sucked the air out of their training camp practice as well. Turned out to be a dislocated toe, and he was back out there on the practice field the very next day. So our most optimistic hopes are in that area for Drew Sanders, to where you hope that he can be back out on the practice field sooner rather than later. But at the same time, kind of preparing for this eventuality at some point. We've been talking all offseason about this potential scenario with a number of guys at the linebacker position for the Denver Broncos. Of course, we had a big scare early in the offseason when it was reported that Dre Greenlaw had a pulled quad or a torn quad, and it ended up being just a pulled quad. And he's been ready for the start of training camp, and according to Sean Payton, actually looks really good out there. But the injury to Dre Greenlaw earlier in the offseason sort of highlighted that the Broncos might be a bit thinner at linebacker than anyone is really comfortable with, although the team doesn't necessarily seem to share that worry, because they brought back Justin Cernad, feel good about having him back as depth, and Alex Singleton coming back from injury as well apparently has given the team all the confidence that they need to move forward with what they've got. And it does help that somebody like Lavelle Bailey has had a few good practices before the pads come on as well. So the Broncos do have guys out there, but they are dangerously close, in my opinion, to sort of suffering the same fate that they did last year, where a number of injuries started to pile up at the linebacker position, and you found yourself in a spot during the year after Singleton went down with that injury in week 3 against the Bucs, where you had to then go to the veterans that were just available by happenstance, right? The Zach Cunninghams, the Quan Alexanders. The Broncos went and brought in Christian Welch before the start of the season. They didn't have full faith that Cody Barton was going to be a full-time starter for them. And he ended up obviously playing a pretty decent role for them. But of course, now you bring in Dre Greenlaw. He's expected to upgrade that unit substantially along with Alex Singleton returning to form and those two guys playing well off of each other. But man, Drew Sanders was obviously going to be a factor in terms of the depth on this team, special teams. He was, one of the only guys that could be a long-term option for the Denver Broncos at that off-ball linebacker position. So this is a pretty big deal when you think about it in that light. And of course, the team is not going to say anything until after Drew has had the chance to get an MRI done, and we can't make any assumptions either way. So of course, at this point, Sean has in the past said things like, it's not good or it doesn't look good or things like that. And he will offer that up on occasion. This time he didn't say anything like that. So I guess you just never know, but you do really feel for a guy like Drew Sanders, who's a young player trying to make his way in the league. And shoot, this is the worst possible timing for an injury like this right before the pads come on, and you haven't even really had a chance to compete for that starting job. It just stinks. It really does. It's like I said, it's the worst part of training camps for every NFL team, and something that we talked about at the beginning of camp, that you really don't necessarily even care so much about the training camp stats and things like that. What you care about is getting guys to the regular season fully healthy. And that's a big ask for any team in the NFL. And so for the Denver Broncos, Drew Sanders going down, getting carted off the field. We don't know the extent of the injury at the point at which we're recording this episode, but of course you can hope for the best. That's it for a guy like Drew Sanders. Getting carted off is a serious deal. So what did the Broncos do at inside linebacker? Well, maybe they could turn to some veteran free agents that are available. I mean, we've talked about Jawan Bentley, former New England Patriots starter. He's been available pretty much all offseason. And of course, that would lead to questions about whether or not, is he healthy? Can he actually play? Can he contribute? So he'd be an interesting name. Kaiser White is another name out there that could be interesting. And then Josey Jewell was just recently cut by the Carolina Panthers. And obviously, the reason why Josey was cut from the Panthers is because he's kind of dealing with the aftermath and symptoms of concussions and not necessarily wanting to take up space on the roster when he's not even sure what's going to be happening for the future there. So the Panthers, though, did apparently leave the door open with Josey to potentially bring him back. And so that would lead me to believe that maybe there is a chance that he could play again. But at the same time, that's not necessarily a situation that you want to bank on, a very scary situation when somebody is stepping away due to symptoms of concussion aftermath. So, but Josey Jewell is a free agent, and the Broncos could also obviously explore just adding more young guys. Maybe there was a tryout player, maybe there's an undrafted guy they liked. Just get a camp body out there. You've got to have guys that you can rotate, though. And so this is a position group where they've already had a tryout player make the team. They've got a couple of undrafted guys. They've got Lavelle Bailey, who was an undrafted player they really liked last year. So it's a thin position. It's an unproven position in many ways, but also you've got that top three still of Dre Greenlaw, Alex Singleton, and Justin Sternad. It's not going to strike anybody as obviously Dre Greenlaw can substantially impact that unit. Let's not downplay that. But I think in terms of just the long term and the injury concern, there's sort of a cloud over having any sort of optimism at linebacker, right? I mean, it's just okay, well, even if it goes well this year, you feel like you're going to have to sort of reset again next year. You're going to have to address the position again and again. And that's why Drew Sanders, that was basically the role that he was playing, was sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, right? You believe in that potential. You believe what the Broncos are saying, that they might have a future starter on their hands. But unfortunately, if injuries keep a guy off the field, it's just like with Greg Dulcich a couple of years ago. You at some point, you do have to cut your losses. And so, again, for the time being, we're not going to make any assumptions. We're going to hope for the best for a player like Drew Sanders and hope that he can get back out there on the field as soon as possible. Broncos country, there's a ton more to break down from Saturday's practice for the team. Some standouts on both sides of the ball, and a day 3 rookie, Q Robinson. He continues to make waves out there at Denver Broncos Training Camp. We'll have that for you coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you just suddenly realize you'd rather be in the stands than watching on TV. Well, that's where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all the stress. And with the money that you save on tickets, maybe you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it all possible. And Gametime also makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app, they actually drop the closer that you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. And Gametime, it's the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, which makes it easy to browse the app if you're a Locked On fan. So if you're like me, you listen to Locked On Cubs, you want to find out if the Cubs are going to be playing in your area or your favorite team's going to be playing in your area. Gametime's zone deals make it easy for you to pick the best seats possible. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This episode is also presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back, so fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions that we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, me and my buddies, we're playing on Yahoo Fantasy, a league that I've had ongoing since before I even got married. This is nearly a 20-year-old league, and we've been playing on Yahoo Fantasy since we were drafting on whiteboards back in the day. And you know what? You should too. Whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, you can use Yahoo Fantasy, one of the easiest to use and one of the smoothest apps for a draft day experience out there. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. It all begins August 4th. So stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. Q Robinson continues to impress as Denver Broncos training camp rolls along. The Broncos will break on Sunday, but they'll be back out on the practice field in pads on Monday. And when they get out there, a number of young players are already going to have their hype train rolling right along. And that would include Q Robinson, a 4th-round pick. We're going to break down Q Robinson's day, some nice things that Sean Payton had to say about Inyoma Uwazurike, as well as a number of other camp standouts and notes that you'll want to know about Broncos Country. But mile high salute to every single one of you that tunes in to Locked On Broncos every single day. We appreciate you so much. If you haven't done so already, go ahead, take a couple of seconds, hit subscribe. We'd really appreciate if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where you can join the conversation as well. We appreciate y'all so much, Broncos Country. Let's talk about Q Robinson having another big day out there at Denver Broncos training camp. I guess as the pads get ready to come on at Monday's practice, there are going to be few young players on the defensive side of the ball that are more anticipated than this guy, because Q Robinson has been flashing since rookie minicamp, essentially, right? I mean, this is a guy who missed some time at Alabama due to injury, but was one of those players who really stood out when he was on the field, played a special teams role for the first few years of his career. And of course, just like a lot of guys, man, it's hard to win and earn snaps on that Alabama defense. But when he finally did this past year, he put some stuff out there that had NFL draft experts absolutely drooling over his potential. And what you see when you watch him is a guy that does have great quickness off the snap. He uses his hands well. He's got a great spin move. He's tenacious in getting after the quarterback. You love the effort. You love the way that he just pursues the quarterback with relentlessness. And I think that if he had been able to put together a full pre-draft workout, I don't think the Broncos would have got him in the 4th round. I think there's just too much good stuff that he showed last year. So yes, in many respects, the Broncos took some risks in this year's draft class, right? I mean, obviously they took Pat Bryant way earlier than people thought. They trade down in the 2nd round and pass on all these other running backs in order to take RJ Harvey. And you obviously took a risk. You take the only punter in the draft. You took a risk on Caleb Lohner, who hasn't even played 60 college snaps at the tight end position. So you took some big risks in this year's draft, including Q Robinson, who doesn't have that many defensive snaps played, quite frankly, but you're trusting in what is one of your best coaches in Jamar Cain, who's done a great job with the pass rushers off the edge, did a great job with all the pass rushers last year in terms of the guys who led the NFL in sacks, right? Jamar Cain is one of the most underrated people responsible for that. And so certainly you want to get your best position coaches, guys who are obviously developing your talent really well. You want to get guys like that, some, balls of clay to mold. And Q Robinson is very much that. And so, yeah, when the Broncos put on the pads, you can bet that everybody's going to have eyes on number 51 because he's been doing such a great job already without the pads on this offseason, showing off and getting that burst out there so that people can see, hey, this is what I bring to the table. Just you wait until I can be more physical. That's what's really exciting about what Q Robinson has done so far for the Broncos. It was also really cool to hear Sean Payton give Inyoma Uwazurike a shout out after practice. Of course, he was asked about Uwazurike, so it wasn't like he just brought him up without being prompted. But at the same time, you can tell that there is a lot that the Broncos like about Uwazurike. And here's a really important note that doesn't get talked about often. Because of his year-long suspension, his contract with the Denver Broncos actually told an entire year. So he was drafted in 2022. This year was supposed to be a contract year for Uwazurike, and now it is not. He is not a free agent after 2025. He's actually a free agent after 2026 now. So he's one of the rare players on the defensive line that the Broncos actually have under contract for the next 2 seasons. DJ Jones is one of the other ones, but really there's not many beyond that, right? Obviously, Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Malcolm Roach, those guys are all free agents after this year. So could that contract situation be a major factor in Uwazurike's favor, especially if, as Sean Payton said, like he's looking athletic out there. He's showing off that size and athleticism combination that had him projected as a starter going into 2023. I think that's also easy to forget about is that after his rookie year, the Broncos didn't do a ton to boost that defensive line in the 2023 offseason after signing Zach Allen because they were banking on Uwazurike becoming a full-time starter for them. So that's important to keep in mind when considering his potential future on this roster. We know the Broncos added Savion Jones. We're excited to see him when the pads come on as well. They traded up to get him in the 3rd round of this year's draft, kind of one of the most forgotten about draft picks from the 2025 class. But Uwazurike obviously bears some monitoring as we go forward here because maybe he was a bit prematurely written off. And now that he's had a year to kind of get back into things, this could be a really pivotal season for him to prove that he belongs in that rotation. So adding another layer of intrigue to an already very talented defensive line for the Denver Broncos. Another strong practice, it sounds like, for Pat Bryant, the rookie wide receiver. Zach Stevens of DNVR said that it doesn't matter what quarterback is out there on the field. He said it seems that the quarterbacks are just finding Pat Bryant relatively consistently. And so this is a guy that we talked about on yesterday's show that he just seems to develop a quick trust with the quarterback because of his ability to get open and his ability to get open after the play breaks down. I think especially not only can he work to get open within his route tree, but Pat Bryant does a great job on scramble drill as well. And you can trust when you throw the ball his direction, he's most of the time going to come down with it. Although Chris Abrams-Draine apparently had a little something to say about that, as at Saturday's practice, Pat Bryant had a ball hit him in the end zone from Bo Nix in the hands, and Chris Abrams-Draine at the very last second was able to pop it out. And Sean Payton talked after practice about how the end of last season, when Chris Abrams-Draine got the chance to come in there against Cleveland and play sort of a rescue role for just the debacle that was the Levi Wallace situation, and then start the next game against the Chargers where he picked off Justin Herbert, he talked about how important that was for building his confidence. And so Chris Abrams-Draine, another player at a position, it feels like a theme on today's show. We talk about Q Robinson coming off the edge, one of the deepest position groups on the roster. Inyoma Uwazurike on the D-line, one of the best position groups on the roster overall. And now you talk about Chris Abrams-Draine at the cornerback position, where man, you just drafted a guy in the first round. You had 3 already established starters at that position group, and this guy is now a factor as well. I would not be shocked, Broncos country, to see the team trade from their depth. You got a lot of teams out there in the NFL right now that are absolutely bleeding at the cornerback position, and the war on attrition as training camp goes along is only going to make things worse. So don't be surprised. I don't think they're going to trade a guy like Chris Abrams-Draine, but I wouldn't be shocked if, obviously folks in the comment section have had their way in the past when I brought this up, but Damari Mathis, I think he'll have some value. Maybe somebody like Jaquan McMillan as well. If the Broncos feel that good about Pat Surtain, Jahdae Barron, Riley Moss, and then obviously Chris Abrams-Draine being their top 4 guys, maybe somebody does get dealt this offseason. We'll see what happens there. But other than that, Mike McGlinchey was back out there observing practice. He had a hat on. I saw some photos of him. So it seems like maybe he'll be back and ready to go on Monday. But Sean Payton said that he would be back either Saturday or Monday. And there he was out there on Saturday. Otherwise, everybody else practicing for the Broncos. And we get excited about what the future holds for this team as they put the pads on for Monday's practice. Things that we'll be watching for, obviously, guys in the trenches and running backs. Those are the 2 things that really, and obviously linebackers too, now, especially in the wake of potential serious injury for Drew Sanders, which we don't want it to be, but you want to see how physical are these guys, right? You want to see the Broncos really setting the tone in terms of, hey, let's hear about the D-line bringing the physicality. Let's hear about the offensive line and that running game looking much improved against that strong defensive line. Very, very excited to hear about the running backs as the pads come on. But of course, Broncos country, that we'll have you covered every single step of the way. Make sure you're ready to tune in for Locked On Broncos, as we'll have you covered after practice on Monday when the Broncos throw the pads on. Until then, we'll see you soon.